Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to, it's my pleasure to moderate this panel session topic, Green and Digital Shipping Corridor, or in short called GDSC. Before I introduce the panelists, I would like to provide some background to the corridor to set the context. The concept of a green shipping corridor was first mooted at the COP26, CMP16, CMA3. You can check on the internet what this means. I cannot remember all of them. But with the introduction of the Clydebank Declaration for the Green Shipping Corridors, which aims to support the establishment of at least 6 zero-emission maritime routes by the middle of this decade, and in April 2022, Singapore joined the Clydebank Declaration alongside with over 20 other signatories. As a major transshipment hub, Singapore is well positioned to catalyze and support the development of green corridors for international shipping. Digital and connectivity ambition is also embedded into the corridors to exploit the synergy between green and digital subjects and Industry 4 technologies and revolutions. In August 2022, the MPA established the first GDSC with the Port of Rotterdam. And yesterday, MPA, Port of Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach also signed a GDSC MOU with the support of C40 cities. And we can expect more green corridors to emerge in the coming years in the support of the green agenda. Now let me briefly share on the aspiration of the GDSC. Under the green corridors, the aspiration is to accelerate decarbonization of shipping industry by working with stakeholders to enable ships calling at the ports of Singapore and partners to achieve net zero emissions by the earliest feasible date. For digital corridor, the ambition is to accelerate the adoption of solutions and global standards to facilitate efficient port call, flow of goods and cargoes, and paperless handling through the Port of Singapore and our partners. Now, without further ado, let me introduce you the very distinguished panel we have here, starting from the from your perspective, right extreme, we have Mr. Thomas Bagger, CEO, DCSA, Digital Container Shipping Association. Thomas is responsible for building strong relationship with stakeholders in shipping and beyond, as well as leading the team to achieve DCSA mission of enabling systematic collaboration in container shipping through technology and standardization. Next, we have Pascal Olivier, Chair of Data Collaboration Committee, International Association of Ports and Harbour, IAPH. Pascal is a renowned port community system expert, having been the founding chairman of IPCSA, IPSA, and now chairing the IAPH Data Collaboration Committee. He has engaged in work for IAPH together with member ports and the World Bank, IMO, WCO, and World Economic Forum on various digitalization initiatives. Next, we have in the middle, Martijn, Head of Ecosystem and Platform Play, Digital Strategy and Transformation, Port of Rotterdam. Martijn has operations management strategy, supply chain background. It is responsible for setting and activating strategic digital agenda for commercial departments. He identifies opportunities to guide the Port of Rotterdam towards its future-proof role in facilitating and accelerating supply chain transformation with digital business solutions and platforms. And last but not least, we have Mr. Andrea Simha, Chief Digital and Information Officer, MSC. Andrea is responsible for steering MSC towards the digital future of shipping and logistics sector, and is focused on innovation and digitalization with a strong emphasis on improving the industry standards while exploring how technology can help create differentiated services. So without further delay, let me warm up the sessions with a few questions to set the foundations of this discussion, starting with standards development, followed by some aspects of the GDSC, and then we will take in some questions from the floor through the pigeonhole. Okay, on the subjects of standards and digital transformation, IMO facilitation committee, which I think some of you are represented here as well. Expert group on data harmonization, EGDH, working on data standards initiative for the maritime industry. And we also know that various organizations, including DCSA, has been doing much work to define operational and technical standards, implementation frameworks, encouraging interoperability and adoption among its members. So the first question I will pose to Pascal and Thomas Berger is, perhaps you could share why standards development and adoption is important for the maritime industry.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you for the invitation to come here to Singapore. It's always fantastic to be here. Well, first and foremost, I think what's critical is that we speak the same language. If we don't speak the same language, there's too much lost in translation, and especially in our industry with so many stakeholders and with so many participants in global trade, the ability to actually have efficient communication, efficient data, without actually losing sight of the benefits there are, that's absolutely essential. So we absolutely need to speak the same language for data to flow quickly, efficiently, high quality.
Yes, Thomas, I think that the standardization is happening at critical times. This morning we were discussing we are in excellent times. This year is unique in the history of shipping. Why is this? Because this is the first time ever in shipping, in 2023, that we have to implement a treaty, the FAL Convention, for mandatory ship-to-shore data exchange. Of course, here in Singapore, we are in a very advanced environment where we have the digital port as SG, the maritime single window of Singapore. But the world is not like this everywhere. And in shipping, when we call 160 ports or more, the reality is slightly different, and we don't have standards. We don't have standards, and we don't have data. Most of the time, we live in a world, it's hard copy, it's PDF, it's email, it's WhatsApp, and 3 days ago, Singapore A-Star launched 2 new satellites for VITAS, which is fantastic to help the masters of the ship for data exchange. But the reality is that we're in a situation that all the ports and maritime authority of the world has to implement before January 1st, 2024, the maritime single window as defined by the IMO FAL Convention and the annex to the FAL Convention. And this is a very important story, because not only we have, in the context of a maritime single window, to implement the regulatory data for the arrival and stay and departure of the ships, but we have also to think the way that we operate port clearance, vessel clearance, and how do we manage all the port call process by itself. And in that context, IAPH, along with the World Bank and IPSCA, also towards the IMO, is supporting this initiative on a global scale. So today we have a number of countries who are moving towards this. When I said a number, it's a huge number of countries who just have no system to get data on the port call. So that's a very important milestones. And just to give you a number, there is an IMO World Bank project going on in Fiji. In Fiji, you have 75 documents for the vessel clearance. 75. So it's beyond the FAL 127 and additional declaration in 75. And everything is hard copy or email. And it's not only about data from a standardization perspective, it's about legal framework as well. They have 11 laws related to the vessel clearance. So think that the standardization is not only at the data level, but it's also at the legal level. We'll talk about it later on.
Thank you. When we talk to companies, they always say that standards is like taking so long forever to be developed, and meanwhile we still have operations to run, we have to continue, and when is the standards going to be ready? So I just want to hear from your view, what are the challenges in terms of the implementing and getting standards adoption, and what are the achievements that we have achieved to date under your respective organization or in your capacity?
Well, actually, I think you should ask Andre for that question.
I knew you were going to do that. And the question was, how do we... Well, you know, creating standards is probably, and I don't want to minimize the work that Thomas and his team are doing, but creating standards is probably the easy part. Of course, you need the agreement of all the parties involved, whether it's the shipping lines, the port communities, the regulators and the others. But the difficult part is actually getting the adoption. So we need to find ways to promote the adoption as DCSA, of course, but also as carriers in a united way, of course, because if MSC promotes a particular standard to its customer base, but the other carriers don't, then it doesn't work. So this is why we do it together. This is why we're all members of DCSA. And is there a secret to adoption? Well, if anybody knows, please ping me after the conference. It's a lot of work, but I think that these discussions we're having now, for example, particularly with representatives from ports and the community, helps a lot. And again, we're in Singapore. Singapore's easy because everything works like this. And you know what I mean, Ken.
But maybe if I may add on behalf of the other members that we have, I actually don't think it's taken so long. I mean, we've been going, we've just celebrated our 4th birthday, but now you have standards in place for booking, you have standards in place for bill of lading, you have track and trace standards, you have operational vessel schedules, and much, much, much more. So there's definitely an emerging digital set of standards out there. And yes, Fiji is going to continue to be difficult, but I think why this is so crucial, that is, we cannot wait for everybody to hold hands and walk in the same direction at the same pace. We need to get started, and the green corridor, the green and digital corridor between Singapore and Rotterdam is excellent, because we're going to show it in a trunk corridor, one of the corridors that carries most cargo in the world.
I think clearly we have to run and walk at the same time, you know, to get to that point. I mean, and why run and walk at the same time is, first of all, we have the mandatory IMO requirements that are standardized. That's one thing. The port clearance is something else. We have our colleagues here from ISO, and lots of people in the room are working on that project for ISO to get the standards of the port clearance, which is beyond the IMO regulatory data. So we have countries who are very good at port clearance. Of course, Singapore is, but we have our colleagues from SINS in Portugal, where all the data for the port clearance is already on their port community systems, for example. But so, yeah, and the full-fledged port call is another story as well. So we cannot wait that everything is finalized at ISO. It's very good news recently from an ISO progress from all the teams there. But we have to implement it. We have to go to each port to re-engineer the business process of the port call and of the port clearance by itself. And it's not an easy one, because you have not only to engage the Port and Maritime Authority, but we have to engage all the border agencies and start the problems. You know, so so we have to work. We have to get everybody on board, and I think that because of the IMO mandate here, we are not only engaging the port and maritime authorities, the border agencies, but we need to urgently call also for all shipping lines, not only container shipping lines, all shipping lines, to work with us, to work with all the port authorities, to go for this new way of re-engineering the vessel clearance process and the port call process.
Fantastic. So maybe I'll move on to the Martin concerning the corridor. As you are aware, there are different corridors being formed around the world for good reasons, and like-minded partners are accelerating the adoption of some of these solutions and global standards. Maybe I will invite Martin to share on more details about the GDSC objectives, and also highlight some of the key work streams and their potential to benefit the stakeholders who are participating in the corridor.
Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, well, I won't take too much of the time because I'll talk an hour for this. But I think if you watch the movie from Channel News Asia this morning on the green shipping corridor with LA Long Beach, you sort of got it covered. Same as what we're trying to do with Rotterdam. So it's similar approaches. We try and learn from each other. Has two components: the green, really carbon-free fuel. In what kind of mixes in the future? How do we structure the ports, the assets around it, rules, regulations, what kind of fuels? Really the green part, and more the digital part, how can we use data to increase efficiency, get trade flowing, and drive the sustainability agenda. Real big part about trade, paperless trade and trade facilitation, the EBL efforts that are ongoing, and DCSA, BIMCO, we fully support it. How can we link our port ecosystems in Rotterdam and Singapore to those efforts to speed it up? Customs collaborations, I want to mention here, bilateral customs agreement between Dutch and the Netherlands customs and other authorities, that they exchange live data on cargo visibility and clearance. That hopefully takes some time between authorities, as we all know, but if that comes up to speed, we get increased clearance speed, so the liners are really happy to hear that. And I think most importantly, what's here and what's I think the discussion should be here this week is how can we walk and run at the same time, right? Because we've got everything we need for port call optimization. At an IMO, IHO, ISO level, the walking part, and no offense, that needs to be done thoroughly, that needs to be globalized standard in Fiji, in everywhere, but can we run on the corridor at the same time with the fast movers, whilst respecting global standards, because that's the only way we have adoptions, because otherwise we end up with more standards, industry-specific standards, which nobody really wants, right? So it's finding the common denominators for global standardization that sometimes requires the fast runners to slow down a bit, even though that's not what they like or what we like, I think. But it also needs the walkers to speed up and adopt good ideas that are already out there instead of sticking to last 10 years walking. And it requires a step change. And we're almost there in my mind, in my feel. And it's tough discussions, but we're getting there. And I think on that sense, by the end of the year, we're preparing the IMO pilot project for administrative nautical operational data between the ports, that we have vessel-to-port communications and port-to-port communications on the standards. If we can then get 12 hours out your arrival pilot boarding place, standardized, communicated, we can reduce 4% CO2 emissions, right? And that's, I think, one of the things that we need to keep in mind, all of us. Stop thinking about your sole money driver. The container lines, the bulk lines, doesn't really matter. It's about what we have to do for the future of the world. And how can we not save CO2 because your margin are going to decrease a little bit bitter. If you're not going to future-proof your business, you're not going to be in business. At least that's the port perspective. And rules or regulations coming at us. The European Maritime Single will dictate this. So better join in now, and the corridors are there. So let's get this going. And I think we've been talking too much, and we need to start doing.
Yeah, maybe it's a good time. Anybody want to add on? Okay, maybe it's a good time. There are some popular questions from the floor. Just to add on the subject of data standards, there is one question on how can data sharing, data governance, and data security be addressed in the context of digital and green shipping corridors to ensure trust, transparency, and privacy among different stakeholders?
Yeah, well, please. I think it was the keynote this morning said that technology is not the issue. We can use blockchain, we can use EPI, we can use EDI, we can use whatever. The tech is there, the parties to create secure data environments, the data sharing infrastructure is there. We've got the port community system, we've got the Nextport, we've got DCSA platform. It's there. So let's find use cases and share your data, shippers, forwarders, carriers, port community systems.
I think that we have also to go back to the basic. And the basic is stop to talk about data sharing. The World Economic Forum a year ago at Davos put a very interesting paper on stop. The time you talk about data sharing, you're dead. So, of course, as IAPH, we are endeavoring to data collaboration, and we have 5 principles for data collaboration, and it's a very different story. The first one is you need to engage stakeholder. The question is not about sharing data. It's to engage stakeholder and to have a relationship with the stakeholder when it comes to data collaboration. Second, you need to establish, in principle, the data governance before you talk. If you have no data governance, nobody will talk and nobody will share data. Three, you have to think that always data is part of a process, so it's about orchestrating data through business processes, so it's not only data by itself. Four, it's about change management, and change management primarily from a legal perspective. And we'll come back later to the model law and electronic transaction record, it's one. But finally, when you do that, when you have data collaboration, is forever. It's not for a pilot, it's not for a park. So you need to have also long-term financial sustainability. So that's are the 5 principles of data collaboration. And when we engage a discussion with any stakeholder, we have a different story than data sharing.
I see that there are quite a number of questions surrounding the just-in-time vessel arrival. And maybe I will just combine them together. Basically, the questions is talking about what are the key barriers to just-in-time vessel arrival in terms of getting adopters and diffusing to large-scale implementation, and whether GIT arrival is even operationally practical to achieve fuel saving and commercial benefits in terms of customer delivery for the container shipping lines. Anyone want to have a take on that?
Yeah, so from a DSA perspective, we've been running just-in-time port call clusters for the past almost 2 years. We've been running them in a number of locations: Hamburg, Rotterdam, Antwerp, Valencia, Tangier Med, Singapore, of course, Busan and Kaohsiung. We've been running them for, I believe, all of our 9 members. And now we are transitioning into a model where we are also with the corridor, but where we are working more specifically and more concrete on getting real value out of that. We're really proud that 4 of the carriers, they're continuing. MSC is continuing with us, Maersk is continuing, CMA and O&E have all joined in because they've seen value in what they've seen in terms of just-in-time. So there's definitely something in there, but it is an ecosystem approach, and you can't just have, let's say, individual just-in-time pilots happening in one port. You can do that for a time being, but then you have to consider it as a string. So there's definitely something in there. I know from, as I was saying to some of our colleagues earlier, I wish I had accurate measurements on what the value was out of that, but we hear there's value, and I'm sure Andre can elaborate on that, but Andre wouldn't spend time on this if there wasn't value for MSC, or would you?
Well, I'm the chairman of DCSA, so I don't have much choice. But no, seriously, I think the benefit of just-in-time and other initiatives is for the whole supply chain. So it's not a question of, is there a benefit for the carrier, is there a benefit for the port? There's benefits for everyone. And in the end, I have Fiji in my head. I don't know why I'm seeing the beaches but I think that's a very good example of a situation where even if you had some documents which were already digitalized, you would still have the rest of the pile that needs to be digitalized. And I think that's why sometimes we have these slowdowns and in the case of just-in-time, you need adoption. You need ports to want to participate, but quite rapidly if you want to get that, large-scale implementation. Otherwise, it's always going to be between the more modern, let's say, or tech bodies, and such as the excellent Port of Rotterdam.
Yeah, but there are still, I have to say, key barriers. I think, as an example, Port of Rotterdam, we only this January moved away from our local water depth tables, went to the global standards, just this year only, right? And so those are barriers that we have to, as Rotterdam, we have to adapt to global standards ourselves even, whilst running, so we're also walking. And I think the second part, key barriers, is what Pascal, thanks for the nuance on data sharing, is that collaboration and agreement on why you share data, not just share your data. Rotterdam is a complex port. And we have got container-wise 5 terminal operators competing and needing to share data. So this discussion on how do we share data to a port communication system, on what terms and conditions, who can see my data, and then have the discussion with the liners, what is the standard and how do we communicate? That's a lengthy process that we've got to learn to trust each other. And so those are key barriers. And I think what we set out on the corridor to do, Thomas, is to do these lessons learned into advanced but complex ports and bring them, let other ports learn from that and don't recreate it. And yeah, so Fiji is completely different, and especially rules regulations probably, so that's going to be a challenge. But the standards and the APIs will be tried and tested.
Yeah, I would complement that to transform the question in a very positive environment. I mean, here we are more, Thomas, at more as an FMC, a first mover coalition. So we have the brain all around the table here in the room. So you had around about 15 pilots, right? So now we need to move next, and not only from a corridor perspective, from a global scale also, but from a regional scales. And if we take a use case going back to Oceania and the Pacific Islands, GIT for them is not on container shipping, it's GIT on tankers, because they don't have enough capacity, physical capacity to store fuel. So the problem is that they have tankers coming from Malaysia or coming from Singapore every 2 days to fill the tanks, you know, in all islands. And it's happening very often that vessel clearance is not happening in one of the ports on the voyage between Singapore or Kuala Lumpur to Solomon Island, for example, and they have to shut down airport, they have to shut down hospital because they don't have fuel. So it's the notion there of the use case is about for essential or critical goods. You know, so GIT, you know, it's not for fun, it's for reality.
I think there's, I'm shifting back to the container lines for a second. I think having worked for one for a period of time, I think there's also an element of flexibility that shipping lines appreciate to have, especially when the market's difficult. So they can make inducement calls, they can do omissions, they can do cut and runs, etc. when things are difficult. And that's a nice flexibility to have. But if you do an inducement call, it will have a schedule effect. And so I think that's a key barrier. I think a global rule book between alliance partners would help in some cases. As an example, when you cross the Pacific, when do you update your schedules and release them to your alliance partners or to the port that you're calling? Is that at the last load port, or when do you do it? Is it 1 week before, or when you have absolute certainty? I think there's a global rule book could play a role here, while still allowing flexibility for carriers.
Yeah, and I guess the setup of the green and digital corridor precisely is to kind of facilitate all kinds of trials and pilots for people who are asking questions on whether GIT and other operational measures really achieve benefits, and how much benefits are we talking about? You know, IMO GIA published certain statistics, certain percentage of the GHG reduction when you perform GIT before arrival at the port. But without the pilots and the trials, for the vessels and the specific routes that are specific to you, I guess you will never know exactly how much can be achieved within an organization. So I think this is an important topic. We hope that when Singapore, Port of Rotterdam, and likewise other ports eventually implement their digital corridor, including the just-in-time vessel arrival interfaces, we hope all the shipping community, the tech providers can come in to participate and do trials, pilots, develop good solutions, adopting global standards. Probably I will move on to the next topic on the electronic bills of lading. So the bills of lading is the most important shipping document, serving as the title of cargo, contract of carriage, and receipt of goods. The difficulty to digitalize the century-old paper BL has impeded the progress of digital trade. To enable the use of EBL as equivalent to paper BL, Singapore, among the first nations, has enacted the UNCITRAL MLETR or Model Law for Electronic Transferable Records under our legislation, ETA and other instruments. So I'd like to hear from the panel, what is your view with regards to the use of contracts or rule books, similar to kind of what Thomas Becker mentioned, versus the use of statutory law for EBLs in terms of risk, scalability, and timeline? So maybe I can hear from Martin as well as Thomas, your views.
Yeah, so for us, I think as Port, the Port Authority, Port Community, Port Ecosystem, we don't have that much to do with EBLs. So for us, and we need to be ready for both models, whether now contractual, what DCSA is working on, and others, whether being ready for the MLETR future, if you say. So we're supporting use cases in both. And that's what our role is, I think, on the corridor. But this is really a document role. And I think the question that just came up, what's the value of an EBL for me as a shipper is a crucial one. And how can we be ready for the different worlds? This is a regulatory affair.
Well, I think it's quite astonishing that we, in this day and age, still use paper. I mean, there's not a lot of places outside what I do for a living where we require that amount of paper to make trade happen. I mean, we go on the internet every day, we buy stuff. We don't print out stuff anymore, at least it's very, very limited. But in our industry, we still print paper. We still take that paper and sign it as a carrier. You hand it over to the shipper. The shipper may even use a bank, and then it goes and it travels on an airplane to the destination, corresponding bank, and back to the consignee that will go and pick it up and present it. It shouldn't be like that. At this day and age, it should be completely digital. So what are the benefits to a shipper? I think there are multiple benefits, but some of them are that I think we can completely reinvent the processes that we see in container shipping today. The way that we go about making a quote, as an example, and getting some information back, and you make a booking, and you provide shipping instructions. I remember that these are old numbers, but there are container lines that have more than 40 engagements with their customers for a booking. 40. Try that on for your online experience when you buy something at home. You would drop off instantly if it was that difficult. So why would we accept it in any other industry? So I frankly think that we can reinvent the whole way we do business if we can get it to digital. And the bill of lading is key to that, naturally.
Yeah, maybe I want to hear some views. I think we are aware that the different shipping lines have adopted kind of a different EBL solutions. And I think MSC also has adopted the particular solutions. Maybe hear from Andrew, what is your views with regards to BL? Yeah.
Well, the first time I was introduced to an EBL was probably 25 years ago by a company that still exists. But we never managed to make that work because of the volume. I think when we talk about digitalization, we talk about it's not transforming a document into a PDF. It's also about the underlying data that's part of that document. And I think there was a question, as a shipper, what are the benefits? I think Thomas answered the question, but you have to look at it in the bigger picture. Bill of lading, very difficult because of all the legal aspects and the banks involved and what have you, and customs, of course. But then you have all the other documents. And when we talk about digitalization, all we're saying is, let's make things simple, let's make things easier. And as Thomas said earlier, when you book a flight and you get your boarding pass on your phone, God forbid there's a problem, because then you can't contact the airline, but that's a different problem. But everything is digital, and there's no need for that paper. So, even if you forget the sustainable part of the discussion, it's a question of simplification and of being able to improve the process and the information flow, the data collaboration with all the parties involved. And of course, in the end with the customer. That was a very long answer.
Yeah, just a follow-on question. We have also seen the different surveys done by FIATA, BINCO, in terms of the adoption rate of the EBL. So DCSA has announced 100% EBL adoption by 2030. And I think BIMCO announced 25% adoption by 2025. Maybe I'd like to understand from your perspective, how is that going to be achieved? Because the adoption rate from the container shipping line today is definitely very low. And I think likewise for some of the liquid bulk cargo for some reasons. Maybe you can hear views from you in terms of, are there some specific steps or solutions that you're thinking in achieving that, whether from Andrea or from Thomas? Yeah.
Well, from MSC's perspective, during the unfortunate pandemic, there was a need to find a solution. And so we started a pilot with a solution that we've implemented together with a couple of other carriers. And the solution itself is not really the issue, because we have the standards that go around the data, and DCSA is working also on the document interoperability, which is key. So how do you go about it? Well, it's about talking about it. It's about looking at the benefits, explaining to your customer base what are the benefits for them and for their customers and the people in between. And then it's a question of talking about it a lot, which is what I try to do. And today, even if we're still at a very low overall number, as MSC we've already communicated, we are already at quite a high percentage of original bills, simply because the solution is, once implemented, is very simple. It can be used by anyone. It doesn't require any specific technology. And I think that is what attracts maybe some of the customers, depending, of course, on how they operate, whether they're BCOs, freight forwarders. It depends a little bit.
I think the key here is interoperability, to be quite honest. If we have interoperability between the different technology service providers, we've come a long way. And one of the reasons why we provide standards is for that interoperability to flourish. And together with a number of technology service provider, carrier, O&E, a customer, ExxonMobil, we had a trial actually from our pilot where we tried it out, the interoperability pilot, from Singapore, a shipment to India for a consignee, where we had 2 different blockchain providers involved, and where we actually made a successful transfer of the electronic bill of lading between the blockchains. So just to say again, we did it with, I believe, 4 technology service providers over 2 pilots. It can be done. It can be done.
Yeah, it can be done. I think same for the MLETR, it can be done. We've done trials between Singapore, Rotterdam on SG TradeX base that the technology works, and now it's about the rules, regulations, accepting that, and whether it's contractual or whether it's MLETR. And I like the shipping part, because I remember when I was a small kid, we were traveling the world, flying around. You had these tickets, right, with it right through 4 times that you had to hand in. That's sort of your EBL. Right now, I automatically get checked in on SQ. I get my boarding pass. I need to find very, very deep to find a ticket number or contract. So a shipper shouldn't worry about whether it's an EBL or not. He just wants his ship's good, and how we arrange it at the back end.
But you also need to further.
I mean, the title document part is the issue, but.
Yeah. But all the other documents is what comes. I think this is where we really see the meat, let's say, is when we start to work on all these other documents from a standards perspective and then from an implementation perspective for carriers and customers. I think that'll be the next big step.
Yeah, I think clearly we have been discussing about the legal framework. I think we should piggyback on what IMO has been doing for the mandatory requirement for the port call. and to use UN CITRAL also in parallel for the cargo move. Because the reality is we don't have illegal instrument in most of the country today for the electronic bill of lading, so it's why it doesn't work. So 3 years ago, there was only one or two, that was Kuwait, the only one who has ratified the model law on electronic transaction record. But if we want to do interoperability between countries, on that respect, we need to go for that. And Rotterdam rules is partially covering it. But so we need to accelerate with UN CITRAL, on that journey. I think that now we have about 12 countries. Singapore ratified 2 years ago, almost. So I think it's there, but we need that not only for this, but we will need UN CITRAL for also for the corridor, for digital corridor in moving on the voyage of the ships. It's not only between Singapore and Rotterdam; it's going to be for all, port concern at the same time.
Yeah, I think we have another few minutes. Maybe I'll just put in the last question, which is the most popular from the vote. The question is, what are the main challenges and opportunities in developing and implementing the digital shipping corridors globally? Maybe I'll let Martin start off.
Well, challenge and opportunity. I think I'm very happy to see all these green and digital corridors popping up. Because that means that we're all working towards the same goal, right? Because the end goal of all of them is the same. So that's a big, big opportunity. I think the main challenge is how do we now create a framework that we can sort of scale on these green and digital collaborations. Because as I think Singapore, Rotterdam and LA Long Beach is not the biggest challenge. It's complex, but it's the rest of the world that needs to come with us. So how can we create a framework of approaches, of workstream content, of standards, of API definitions that we can actually scale and bring to the other corridors. And we can also learn from Singapore, Rotterdam, that we can learn from other corridors as well. And take that into our corridor and don't be oblivious for that part. There's a lot of good work being done on other corridors and other collaborations, so bring that in. And I think that's the biggest opportunity, but also a challenge, right? It's complex, it's a lot of people, it's a lot of talking, and how do we run whilst walking or vice versa?
Maybe one angle would be to take it from slightly differently from what we do today, from a corridor perspective, long-haul corridors, but like between Rotterdam and Gothenburg, for example. So a short sea shipping corridor, and it's maybe where the hub and spokes could play. I mean, all the transshipment players could lead the initiative. You can take CMA CGM in Kingston, in Jamaica, with all the Greater Caribbean, for example. It's an example. We can do the same thing for each major transshipment hub or even regional transshipment hub.
I think the biggest challenge, quite frankly, is collaboration. I think the ability of all the stakeholders to join in, to say, yes, we're going to do this. Yes, we're going to do it, even though it's hard. We're not going to lose patience with it. We're going to keep on trying until we get it right. I think that's the biggest challenge we have.
Yeah, since our panelists fly all the way to Singapore, I think we will indulge a few more minutes. Let me wrap up with one final point on the green and digital corridor, which is meant to complement and reinforce the work of the global bodies such as the IMO, IHO, ISO, advocating and acting, an inclusive approach, piloting projects, sharing experience with international organization industries. I'm sure this panel session will continue in the years as the ports and the shipping lines form more corridors around the world to do trials. Maybe I'll end off with a kind of a wish list from each of the members in terms of what you would like to see under the GDSC, as well as what are the things you want to see that the Seaport can do to enable frictionless, paperless, and transparent shipping. Maybe starting with Andrea.
Well, that's a tough question for me. Look, I think we've discussed a lot of things here. We've talked about data collaboration versus data sharing, which I'm going to use that. Yeah. I think it is all about collaboration. It is all about the data collaboration. It is about trust. Trust is probably something we don't talk about enough, but that is what helps people. That is what helps us collaborate. It's also about having the ability to create the standards, that give you the foundation of all these different solutions that that we're building upon. And I think that the, you know, ports, countries like Singapore that are open to that, of course Rotterdam as well, is what's going to make that happen. It's very simple. Now the question is, how do we do that a little bit faster? I think it's walking and running at the same time.
Yeah, I think building on that, on the trust, that's crucial for us. How can we get this going? And we've been here, and I think once we've got the standards going, once we've got the data flowing, we can engage with the startup, scale-up, innovation ecosystem, and then we get really snowballing. So lowering the cost of trust, and maybe to add on that, value. So don't think, if you're in this collaboration part, don't think of your own value is the key value driver of the collaboration. It might, for some, it might be monetary. For some, it might be CO2. For some, it might be different. So be open about what drives your business model. Fine if for yours is making money. For a port, it's creating an efficient port. For a liner, it's might be something different than for a bunker provider. So discuss what is the value that you want to get out of the collaboration, because then you can find common denominators. And don't think, hey, I'm here to protect my value and play a game of cards with the other. Now put your cards on the table. Of course, commercial, stay out of the way. Put your cards on the table and then take that as a starting point. That will be my call to action.
Yeah, I do agree about trust. It's really the foundation platform. And as key takeaways, it's about 6 words to make it happen. It's about public, private, data, collaboration for the common good. And the common good is important to shipping.
Yeah, so a lot has been said. I do believe that the key part here is trust, and I really think to move the industry forward together, we have to be able to share the outcomes, the value that we see out of these pilots. It's essential. If we don't do that, we will try and play games and be at a below par level. So to really get up there and learn from each other, honestly learn from each other, create a more sustainable world, save fuel, better customer experience, reduce scope 3 emissions, all of that, we need to play more with open cards to the extent that it's possible.
We have come to the end of the panel session. So I think as Singapore, Port Rotterdam, US, Asian ports, we are discussing all the corridors, more projects beyond JIT, EBL, digital bunkering, digital ship supplies. All the paperless and digital and the green projects will emerge, and definitely I think we welcome the shipping community and the tech providers, the research community in the coming months, coming years to participate in the GDSC. And with that, I want to thank our distinguished panelists for their lively contribution. Thank you.